Welcome to the Wheel of Time Diaries. I am your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today is the second episode for The Gathering Storm, Book 12 of the Wheel of Time, the first entry written by Brandon Sanderson. Now, I am recording this the same day as my diary for last week, covering the prologue and chapters 1 through 12. So if you missed that, obviously check out that video to get my general spoiler-free overview and thoughts for basically the first half of the book, actually, because I'm recording this the same day as last week's diary, which means that in the course of that 1 week, I actually read enough to get through 2 diaries worth of material, but that video was very long and there was too much content to actually do half of the book in one episode. Absolutely not going to happen. So we are covering chapters 13 through 26 today. I spent about 6.5 hours worth of time reading this next quarter of the book compared to the 8 hours last week, but that puts my total for The Gathering Storm so far at just about 14.5 hours, and those 14.5 hours were done in a week, which I think that might be the most amount of hours that I've read of the Wheel of Time in 1 week's worth of time since like plowing through most like the back half or whatever of The Dragon Reborn. So it's been a couple years, you know, it's been like 2.5 years since then. Maybe Path of Daggers I read pretty quickly. I read that book in just 2 weeks, but that book's only like 220,000 words or less, as opposed to this, which is pretty much 300,000 words. So relatively speaking, I'm going at quite a clip, and more specifically, this week's reading I read quite quickly. You know, it was 6.5 hours compared to 8 hours last week, despite being pretty comparable amounts of content. So the chapters just went by super quickly this time around, and for spoiler-free impressions of that second quarter of the book, that last bookmark in there is indicating where I got to get to for the next diary, so don't mind that. Anyway, my spoiler-free thoughts on the second week's worth of reading is largely a continuation of the first week's. I spent a good chunk of last week's video at the beginning going over my spoiler-free thoughts that basically encompass the whole first half of the book, not just that first quarter. So, like I said, definitely check out that video for the broader spoiler-free thoughts if that's what you're in here for. But in general, for this video, I will say it is largely a continuation. I think that the book is very strong. I think that Sanderson has a very good understanding of the characters and the world, generally speaking. I will concur with the opinion that his handling of Matt is a little bit more juvenile, a little bit more exuberant in ways that's kind of questionable compared to normal, and I think that relatedly, Talmanes is handled a little bit weirdly here in the couple of scenes that Matt has in the book. All of the scenes that Matt has in the book so far have been in this week's reading, although next week's diary will start off with 2 Matt chapters. We'll see how that goes. But outside of just a little bit of weirdness with Matt in a couple of those spots, like I said, it's pretty minor, and he understands and executes on all the other characters so well that I basically don't have reason to complain. I'm not inclined to complain very much. That is for sure. I'm having a very good time with this, and if I thought that last week's reading was good, and I did think that last week's reading was very good, great time with it. So far, this book is reminding me what I loved about the early series. Easy 5-star potential up to this point, but this week's worth of reading, the second quarter in particular, has at least 2 little moments, 2 chapters, 2 sequences, if you want to call them sequences, even though they're not long enough to be considered a sequence, that I would consider like amongst the best of the series, at least in a very long time, at least since like book 5, for example, or book 6, I guess, since book 6 has a Do My As Wells, which is one of the best sequences of the series. But you know, just generally speaking, there's a lot of really great moments in the reading for this week, and I don't want to waste too much time in the recording of this. I don't want to waste too much time in this video because last week's diary was already very long, and I think this week's diary is going to be pretty long as well. So let's just jump right into it. Plus, I've also been recording for, I want to say, about 6.5 hours, 7 hours worth of time today, not to mention also doing a lot of talking for a couple hours beyond that. So my voice is, I'm surprised that my voice is holding out as well as it is. There was a voice crack earlier. If there are any other voice cracks in this video, it's because I've done a lot more talking today than normal, so I apologize. But let's go ahead and jump into the spoilers section and kind of address what I'm going to be covering. Like I said, it will be chapters 13 through 26, but I think kind of similar to what I did in last week's diary, I'm going to try to do as much of a particular category of storyline. Man, there's actually a lot to get through this week. This is going to be a mess. Okay, I've just spent like 10 or 15 minutes or something like this just going through my notes and looking at what all happens in different storylines and what orders and what stuff is relevant to other like specific POVs, and therefore what order it'll be best to actually cover them in this diary. Now, one thing that I did last week was, like I said, I kind of swapped back and forth a couple times between a couple of the storylines, but one thing that I didn't do in there was be a little bit more specific on chapter order, because there was stuff going on in ATTRIBUTION in last week's reading, for example, but there were a couple different POVs, and between those POVs, they weren't exactly like interconnected storylines. There was a little bit of overlap in a couple spots, but not super major overlap, and something pretty similar does actually happen this week, where like there's the White Tower political related type of stuff going on, for example, but you switch between certain POVs that are covering different storylines, technically speaking. Depending on how I want to cover this, we're going to be jumping back and forth a lot, so I apologize for that, but the timestamps down below do, specify which chapters I'm actually covering in any given moment, and those will generally be grouped between which ones are a little bit more relevant to each other, and therefore, I'm just going to go in order. So like I said, I'm going to be jumping back and forth between a lot of things, trying to tie things together as best as I can to keep this coherent without just jumping one story back and forth with different POVs like the chapters themselves do. So what we're going to do is we're covering chapters 13 through 26 here, but we're going to actually start with chapters 14 and 15 in the ATTRIBUTION section. Actually, 14, 15, and 17. So we're going to go through these chapters in ATTRIBUTION and go from there. So chapter 14 begins with a Cadsuane POV where she is kind of meeting with Soraleia and Bear, so a couple of the Aiel Wise Ones, and they're not just meeting specifically, they're trying to interrogate Semirhage pretty unsuccessfully. Semirhage seems to, she barely reacts to a lot of their stimulus. Cadsuane had some ideas, as we discussed last week, about ways to try to get Semirhage to break, and that being a little bit more related to how Cadsuane might break, because she sees some similarities in certain like temperament between her and Semirhage, because they're not allowed to torture Semirhage because of Rand's command. So they're trying to do something to get her to dock, and it's pretty unsuccessful. But she does, however, show a spark of emotion when Soraleia does make a personal insult, or when the Wise Ones make a personal insult against Semirhage. Because, of course, it's the Wise Ones, the Aiel Wise Ones, who are currently trying to interrogate Semirhage, whereas normally it would be Aes Sedai. And while the Aes Sedai do take a little bit of issue with this, Cadsuane probably had the idea, it's just like, well, I'm working with them to some degree. There's a sort of allyship between Soraleia and Cadsuane going on. It's just like, okay, well, let's try them, because they're pretty good at interrogating people. The Wise Ones are very good at this thing. Let's give it a shot. So Cadsuane does notice that Semirhage does react to a personal insult. So it seems to be a pride thing. Let's break her pride down rather than try to hurt her, because again, Semirhage is pretty well versed with torture, so torture isn't necessarily going to work on her per se, and in fact, she's a little bit sadistic and might get off on that kind of thing. But Cadsuane does also show Soraleia, specifically in person, the male Adam that she has locked away, because of course it's the dominating band, as it is more or less specifically referred to a little bit later, and that band is something that Rand basically let Cadsuane have ownership of, to make sure that it doesn't get out and do anything, that it can't be used, right? And Cadsuane has a ward set on a box where this item is located. This will come back later. We will talk about this again, but Cadsuane does show Soraleia that she has this thing. They determine that it would be good to test it somehow, that it would be useful to test it somehow. So I guess I was wrong. This chapter is an actual meeting between Cadsuane and the Wise Ones, not because they're actively interrogating. That scene happens a little bit later, I think. In fact, it does. But in either case, they determine altogether, it's just like, maybe it would be good to test this kind of thing, but Rand has forbidden it. If any Ashaman or him are in any way used with this bracelet. Like, it's not going to be good at all. Like, he's not going to be unhappy. But they also agree that Rand is growing a little bit more unstable, and so they wish to be able to have some way to maybe potentially be able to control him if he gets a little bit out of hand. So this is a discussion that is actively happening. But the main thing worthy of noting in this chapter is the dominating band exists. It is in Cadsuane's care, and people know about it. So yes, this is important to know. But that takes us into chapter 15, which is actually a Rand POV, and he awakens in a form of dream world, kind of weirdly enough. In this dream world, it's not Tel'aran'rhiod, it's a little bit different, and it's also not like a regular dream where he's just kind of exists, you know? In this weird dream world that he is in, he meets Moradin. Weird meeting Moradin here, but he does do that, and Moradin, he recognizes him, like, not just as a Forsaken. He recognizes Moradin as the person who was once Ishamael, and therefore the person who was Baalzamon, so the person that Rand basically defeated 3 times in the original trilogy of the series, but defeated more or less for good, with, what is the blade called? Kalendor or something like that? I don't remember. It doesn't matter. The crystal sword that is used at the end of The Dragon Reborn. Of course, Moradin was reborn as Moradin, and this is kind of how Rand learns, is through this confrontation with Moradin in this dream, that the Dark One can raise the dead, basically. Like, it cannot stop them. But he also learns at the same time that those killed with Balefire are erased from the pattern entirely. Like, Rand already knows that that's what Balefire does, but that means that even those erased with Balefire cannot be brought back by the Dark One, because the Dark One, even he cannot reach that far. Even he doesn't have that much control over the dead. So Rand has got this in his mind now, that maybe Balefire could be useful against people like the Forsaken, so that they don't just come back again and again indefinitely, because that would be a problem. It is also determined in this dream that Rand and Moradin have some form of link with one another. I feel like this is something that had been hinted at a couple of times in the series so far, but what exactly that means, I'm still not 100% sure. But using this as kind of a basis, as like to relate with Rand, quote unquote, Moradin offers some sort of position of like kinship alongside the Dark One to Rand, and Rand ultimately refuses, because of course he is the Dragon Reborn, and he's also Lews Therin, and he says, how about no, actually, I'm just going to end the cycle. And Moradin kind of doubts that this is possible, and for good reason, actually. Like, that's a big ask. Like, you know, the world just keeps being reborn in this cycle of ages. The wheel of time just keeps on repeating itself. How do you expect to end the Dark One this way? If nothing else, you should let the Dark One win, so that everything stops, so that there is no more cycle for you guys to be reborn and die in all the time, right? But Rand does promise to end the cycle with the Dark One's death directly. That is basically a promise he makes straight to Ishamael, to Moradin. But yeah, that is the meeting with Moradin in the dream. We jump to a Min POV who is studying one of Herod Fell's books beside Rand while he is sleeping, you know, until he awakes from the dream. Rand does basically finally tell her about the voice of Lews Therin directly, where, like, there's this people wondering about how crazy Rand is, how stable he is, and Rand finally admits straight up, it's like, no, you guys are all right. Like, I do have this voice in my head, but I feel like I'm distinct from him, which is what all crazy people say, of course. But he does finally tell her about Lews Therin. He also tells her about Ishamael, who is alive, and she's like, yeah, but didn't you kill him? And he's like, yes, but he's been reborn, because the Dark One can apparently do that, so that's a problem. Min does, however, convince Rand that to defeat the Dark One, it's not about locking him away again, because I feel like to an extent this has more or less been the tactic of the ages past, that she feels like she's onto something from Herod Fell, that maybe the thing to defeat the Dark One isn't just locking him up again or whatever, it's by actually breaking the seals to his prison and doing something specific, maybe to actually like kill him, question mark. I'm not 100% sure on the details, but I don't think she's even sure on the details, but she seems pretty convinced that breaking the seals to the Dark One's prison is how to do it. And Rand more or less agrees with her. He's like, I think you're right about this. I just instinctively think you're right. But how do you contain the Dark One when the prison is broken? Like, how do you actually do that? And that becomes the question. So that's probably a little bit of the exploration that we're going to get a little bit more on, the last battle side of things as far as the series goes. We then jump over to an Aviendha POV to close the chapter, and it's Aviendha basically just continually being hounded by the Wise Ones, doing menial tasks. This time, in this particular scene, it is by Amis. It's basically them investigating the return of some Aiel from a meeting with the Shan-Chan. They're going to meet with some Shan-Chan folk, and they have agreed to meet with Rand. The Shan-Chan have agreed to meet with Rand, and we will come back to the Shan-Chan a little bit later. But it seems like the Aiel who come back from this meeting are pretty shaken by having encountered some Shaido Aiel having been shackled in the camps of the Shan-Chan. They think that they are flaunting that a little bit too openly, even though, the Shan-Chan are basically traitors. They don't really like the Shan-Chan. It is still disturbing to see Aiel Wise Ones shackled up in a dom, being taken control of this way by the Shan-Chan. So that is a problem. But actually, that is going to go ahead and take us a little bit differently into a different line of thought than I originally was going to organize this video, because mentioning the Shan-Chan there in chapter 15, instead of going into 17 now, we're actually going to cover chapters 19 and 20, because that actually takes us into a relevant storyline along those lines. And that is because, one second, I'm just organizing my material here so that I don't get lost while I'm trying to record this video, because there's a lot of chapters, and bouncing back and forth like this is bound to get me confused at a point or two. So we're going to jump to chapters 19 and 20. Like I said, that is because chapter 19 sees us in a Tuon POV, and Tuon is actually back in Ebu Dar because, of course, at the end of the last book, Matt finally agreed to let Tuon get back to Ebu Dar like he promised, actually send her back, and now she is in Ebu Dar, and she's basically all but the new empress because, her mother, the actual empress, has been assassinated, so she's basically in this empress role now. I don't think she's fully revealed herself yet still. She might still technically be the daughter of the Nine Moons, which might be distinct. I'm not entirely sure how the ranks work with the Shan-Chan, but it's Tuon. She's the Empress. For all intents and purposes, she is the Empress. And in Chapter 19, she does deal with a few things going on politically. One of those political things, for example, is King Beslin. Beslin is, of course, Queen Tylan's son. Is that her name, Tylan? Who died at the end of Winter's Heart? Wait, no. When did she die? Was that at the end of Crown of Swords? Was it that long ago? Because I don't think there was Matt storyline in book 8. In either case, Queen Tylan, the queen of, oh man, what is the place called? I need to remind myself. Queen of Altara? Is it Altara? Okay, I was right. The Queen of Altara was murdered, and people suspect that Suroth might have had something to do with it, because Tuon obviously knows now that Suroth betrayed her, and there was the issue with Samiraj, who has been captured, and the fact that Samiraj was able to disguise herself as Tuon to meet with Rand, and there's just a bunch of chaos going on, which of course is the point of the Forsaken. They're trying to sow chaos, but Tuon is I need to be order, so she's trying to make order out of all the things that are going on. Anyway, so she's dealing with political stuff, and one of those political things is Queen Tylan's son, who is now the rightful king of Altara, who has basically kind of been resisting the Shan-Chan to one degree or another now, implicitly, because obviously he might not necessarily, I don't know if he necessarily wants the throne per se. He might, but it's more just trying to be young and showing a display of power. I forget if there's anything technically that he's actually trying to achieve here. Of course, he was trying to distract Shan-Chan while Matt got away, escaping all that time ago. But, for the moment, he's basically leading some kind of quasi-resistance of sorts, and Tuon is just stop that. You don't need to do that. I assure you that your best path is to be subservient to the Shan-Chan. I can guarantee that you are the king of Altara. I don't want to be king of Altara. That's not the point of this. You can be king of Altara. And if you accept this role to be subservient to me, to be subservient to the Shan-Chan, you will be the king. You will also be raised to the high blood of the Shan-Chan, and you won't basically be resisted. Like, you'll be able to be in meetings and stuff with anything that I'm doing concerning your country, or any meetings that I have within your country. You can be present, because I'm not trying to usurp your control of your country. Just, I also have some manner of control over your country. You answer to me to some degree, but you still have control. Like, you would basically have free reign. So she's offering this to Beslin, and he ultimately swears fealty to her. And he actually asks her at one point if she is Taverin, because he was like, I definitely did not come into this meeting expecting to swear fealty to you. Like, he was probably trying to resist even more, but he swears to serve Tuon. So that's something interesting that happens, and maybe because of Tuon being tied in with Matt now, Matt being Taverin, maybe that has something to do with it. I'm not sure how far-reaching that kind of thing is, but, it's definitely a question to ponder for sure. Also, there are more things going on, such as Tuon's general wanting to strike Tar Valon, to capture some Aes Sedai and, have some more of those forces, some more of those magic wielders that they can control to some degree. And they also want it to be a move against Rand as the Dragon Reborn, because they think that the Aes Sedai are sided with Rand. They're not 100% sure if they're sided with Rand or against. The rumors seem to be contradictory, but the generals basically agree that this would be the best move, is to attack Tar Valon, steal away some Aes Sedai, and then, use that as a show of power, basically a show of like, we have this power to do these things to Rand. That's basically what they do. Despite the risks, they believe it is the most sensible move for their expansion. But however, this also comes alongside the fact that Rand does want to meet with Tuon. He does want to meet with the daughter of the Nine Moons. This is also reported to Tuon, and she's like, so you want to meet with Rand, but you also want to strike Tar Valon and possibly strike him? Like, he's not going to be happy with that if that's the case. But again, general political stuff, the actual details of it don't really matter, because in comes Tylee, of course, Tylee Kiergan, who battled alongside Perrin at Malden, to free Zareen in the last book. In comes Tylee to tell about, some of the Trollocs outside of the city, and the world writ large, that these Trollocs, these figures that the Shan-Chan previously thought were some manner of like mythical, maybe, that they actually exist, and also that they are within Shan-Chan forces. So that's something to keep track of, or within Shan-Chan boundaries, that they seem to be a little close to the city. So that's something to worry about. But she also suggests pretty personally and pretty boldly to Tuon that Rand and his people would make better allies to them than enemies. And this kind of goes along the fact that Rand wants to talk with Tuon about, this kind of thing, about potentially being allies against the Dark One at the last battle, because that is more important than fighting each other, and none of them have the forces to do both fronts. So Tuon sees the sense of this suggestion and actually does agree to meet with Rand. Presumably this scene technically happens before the scene discussed before with the Shan-Chan, or the Aiel coming back from a meeting with the Shan-Chan, that they have agreed to meet with Rand. Presumably these are technically in a backwards order, but with all of the stuff going on between different POVs and storylines, it would be hard to actually put all of this into some sensible chronological order. So, the fact that these are related means that it makes sense to talk about this now, like I said. So she does do that because he has requested an audience with Tuon. But because we're talking about Tuon, we might as well talk about the one dedicated Matt chapter in this section of reading. That is chapter 20, the very next chapter, in fact, and sees Matt and co, after being lost in Murundi for a little while, finally happening upon a little village called Hinderstap, where Matt plans to partially resupply his army and then make way further to Caemlyn before Matt and Tom, head even further than that to actually go to the Tower of Genji, their ultimate goal here, to try to save Moraine from this weird quasi-death, but maybe not death state, whatever it is that the Tower of Genji represents. But yeah, this is the chapter where, like I said, I kind of understand why people might take some issue with how Matt is characterized by Brandon in this book. But actually, I don't take as much issue with Matt's characterization as Talmane's specifically, and that is because, well, Matt is pretty on edge about a lot of things, including Tuon, about women, this kind of attitude that he has had for, several books now at this point, though he denies being on edge about Tuon, and Talmanes makes a lot of light about this with him. But the reason why I think this bothers me, why Talmanes bothers me more than Mat, is because Mat's general attitude in here seems to be mostly consistent with his actual thoughts. It might be a little bit more juvenile, but it's more like he's just more expressively, exuberantly, and outwardly expressive about those feelings than normal, which is a little bit weird, but the actual things he is saying and the way that he's saying them isn't that much different than what he says in his head and how he says it in his head. It's just that maybe now, after being lost for a little while and kind of dealing with this external pressure, maybe the pressure is just cracking him a little bit and he's just being a little bit more manic about it. To me, like, it still broadly fits with his characterization, even if it does come across as a little bit weird. So I don't actually take that much issue with it. It's not enough to really bug me, but maybe that's also because I find it a little bit entertaining and amusing. I actually find it it is a little weird, but it's also kind of goofy in a way that I'm like, whatever, I don't mind. But Talmanes actually bothers me a little bit more because the way that Talmanes talks to Mat in this chapter is like, a sort of an amused parent trying to, not really doing much work to, they're not like indulging their child, but you know how it is when it's like yes, that's fine, dear, kind of like not encouraging it, but not stopping it kind of attitude. And the fact that Talmanes says Mat's name in basically every single sentence is also a little annoying. And I don't remember Talmanes basically ever talking before. And he seems to like be a little bit more talkative. He is saying Mat's name. He is being a little bit less reserved than he himself normally tends to be. Where like, sure, Mat is saying a lot of things out loud that he would normally stick to his head, but his general attitude and stuff is largely the same. Talmanes just feels like a different character to me in this book. So he's actually the one that bothers me. He's the only one that I feel like is like legitimately different than the character I know from previous books. But then Talmanes is a very minor character, so maybe I don't know him that well. But in either case, Mat's on edge, all this stuff going on. When Aes Sedai amongst their group find out that they are near a village, the Aes Sedai try to weasel out a couple dozen horses from Mat so that they can make further travel alone, because Mat technically has given them leave to travel alone. He tells them that they could be or should be traveling alone, but they insist on having a lot of extra supplies and horses and stuff to make that journey, and Mat's like, no, I'm not going to give you extra stuff to go alone. If you want to go alone, just go, So they decide to just stick around the camp. It makes them stay for better or worse. And then ultimately, Mat and Talmanes have made like a pact that the next village that they come to, that they would play some dice because Mat is on edge. And, just this kind of weird interaction a little bit. Mat decides that he's going to go get a drink in the village so that he can gamble with Talmanes without soldiers causing problems, because he orders for the soldiers to not be allowed to the town to cause problems because it is a village. And, Mat does need to resupply and stuff anyway. So he's like, he has a reason to go, so he's going to go. That's all that happens in that chapter. But now we're going to switch gears a little bit again, and we are going to return to chapter 17, that Eredamon plotline like we kind of talked about before. But it's going to be Cadsuane POV again. I just thought like it was worth switching gears a little bit to talk to the Seanchan when it was relevant, because we're going to be switching gears again here very soon. That is because chapter 17 has two POVs. The first one of those is Cadsuane. So Cadsuane eavesdrop on an interrogation of Semirhage. So this is the scene that I was thinking about earlier when I misspoke about that it was an interrogation. This is the interrogation scene. Cadsuane eavesdrops on it. Sorry, English is difficult when I've talked this much today. And continues to wonder about why Semirhage isn't breaking, why her will isn't breaking, why she isn't talking. And it suddenly clicks with her when all of a sudden, after food is dropped, Cadsuane realizes that the way to break Semirhage is to basically humiliate her. Obviously, her pride was wounded a little bit from that one comment from Sorilea that we got, a little bit of reference to in that previous Cadsuane chapter. So Cadsuane realizes, just like, wait, torture would be completely ineffective. This woman needs her pride and her self-image broken. The reason why nobody is getting anywhere is because the Aes Sedai that are interrogating her respect her too much. And by respect her, it's more like they're in awe of her. So Semirhage has this downwards power dynamic over them, able to look down upon them because they inherently respect her power and her her reputation. There is a reputation there that they think about when they're interrogating her. So Cadsuane is just like, don't give her that pride. Don't allow her to have that pride. Don't allow her to hold that position over you, and she might start to break. So food is dropped in the room in there because Samira just, being obstinate, she refuses to eat. So food is dropped, things are broken, food's all on the floor. Cadsuane uses this opportunity to enter and to beat and to base Samiraj and break her pride, which works. She forces Samiraj to basically eat off of the floor, and this actually breaks Samiraj's will. And, there might be a certain valid criticism to this scene because there is a little bit of spanking involved, which is weird, but, to debase Samiraj and to break her pride and force her to eat the food off of the floor, and doing this with the spanking and stuff, like, honestly, relatively speaking, this kind of actually works for me. I don't love the spanking stuff, especially since spanking with the White Tower with the Aes Sedai is not something that was really a thing until like a couple books ago. That was never anything that was ever mentioned or used for punishments before that I knew of. Not unless you counted like, little bits of weaves of air being used to like slap somebody for something. But like actual spanking hasn't been used. But in this case, like this actually totally works because in context, it's just like, yeah, what's one way to break her pride? Let's just spank her. Kind of like the one spanking scene from Egwene a few books back, what actually made sense because it's like, well, we don't know that the Aiel don't do this, and the Aiel wise ones have this way of debasing their own apprentices to ensure that they can handle this type of pain. And yeah, that makes sense. I'm not going to argue with it. So this is another case where it's like, I don't take that much issue with it. Also, you could be a little bit critical of like Samiraj breaks a little bit too easily here, but this is something that Sanderson, kind of covers a little bit because in a later scene, we do have a Samiraj POV later that we'll talk about later, that, sees her basically talking to herself in her head like, how could I have been broken so quickly and so easily by this woman? How did that happen? So like it's even that is acknowledged, so it's not very much of a criticism. It's more like a wow, that was easy. But it goes to prove the fact that Cadsuane wondering about how to break Samiraj, it was a good thing to wonder about because she realizes it and she was able to do it here. So that is going to be important later when we return to the Eredamon plotline. Basically at the end of the video, we're going to be switching gears just a little bit again, and we're going to be talking about chapters, well, we're still in chapter 17, but we're going to continue in chapter 17 and then talk about chapter 21, because the second POV of chapter 17 takes us to Perrin's plotline. Perrin stresses over sending refugees to their homes in this chapter. This is something that he needs to do, but he also acknowledges that like I should be sending these people home, but he is also getting the information from some of his people, some of his advisors, that like most of these refugees don't want to go home for one reason or another, because their homes are either places that are manned by Shan-Chan and they don't really want to go back to Shan-Chan, or they like being with you, or some of these people have sworn, obedience or fealty to some degree or another to Zareen, specifically from the Gaishain camps, for example. Perrin doesn't know this, but we know this. So like there are different reasons why certain of these characters don't really want to go back home. But, Perrin does believe that they should be going back home. He has this stress about needing to send them that despite his Ashamon's exhaustion, but he does realize that he's not been in touch with his leadership role. Like he's in denial a lot of the last few books about the fact that he does lead this group of people. He's in denial that these refugees would want to stay with him and his army for any reason. So he considers this just like, okay, well, I still need to let my Ashamon rest because they can't really open gateways very wide or for very long to let that many people through, no matter how many of them do actually want to go home. So like I should let them rest. And then he finally realizes that he's not been in touch with his wolf self, the wolf brother side of his personality for a little while. He's come to accept that part of the identity a little bit, like his eye color doesn't really bother him anymore. It's just part of who he is now. So he's not as self-conscious about that detail, but he hasn't really been in touch with his wolf self himself. So he decides that he must return to the wolf dream pretty soon to know what path forward he needs to take at this point, because he's not entirely sure what he's going to do. And that takes us into chapter 21, which is a Perrin and Zareen chapter. It goes back and forth between them, and chapter 21 opens with Perrin actually entering the wolf dream, following up on that. He enters the wolf dream. He has some honestly some unexpected interactions with Hopper, the dead wolf, of course. Hopper basically forces him out of the dream because he has this foolish obstinance and a lack of care. Like, Perrin wants, I forget what it is specifically that he's trying to do in there, but he's being foolish, he's being hasty, he's trying to just get his way. He doesn't believe that Hopper's actually trying to help him with anything, help him actually get in touch with his wolf self within the dream. So Hopper basically forces him out of the dream and tells him to return when he wants to actually listen. So that is something that happens. But in waking up from his dream, he does basically determine that he also has some other things about himself that he could be fixing in the meantime, not just being in touch with his wolf self, but that he's also realizing that he needs to stop avoiding making decisions. That part of the reason why he was so dogged about getting after Zareen and rescuing her was because he didn't actually want to have to make hard decisions, and just being like, okay, we're just going to go after Zareen. That's the goal. Like, I'm not going to make any other decisions other than whatever I need to do to get her. And so he realizes that, like, that maybe might have been a bad thing as far as a leadership role is concerned. He needs to be open to the fact that he has to make decisions, and people look to him for decisions. So, you know, he determines that he needs to stop avoiding that, and that in order to meet the last battle, he needs to be in control of that. He needs to be in control of his leadership side, and he also still needs to be in control of his wolf side. So he has this self-reflection. But there's also a Zareen POV within the chapter, which sees her meeting with her, the fellows. Some of her fellows, you know, some of the people who were with her, friends with her, followed her in the Guy Shane camps. Those of them who were aided and protected by some of the brotherless, because of course within the Shido camp at Malden, you know, the Shido weren't really following a lot of the Aiel customs and rules with regard to Guy Shane, which was a problem. But there are some of the brotherless, which are, you know, Aiel who didn't accept Rand as the Karkarn, as the Dragon Reborn, you know, this chosen one figure within their own prophecies, but also were not part of the Shido Aiel. These people who were like kind of off put by the fact that the Shido didn't really respect Jieto or have any of this, you know, respecting Guy Shane in the way that they were supposed to. So some of the brotherless kind of opted to protect some of the Wetlander Guy Shane, because Wetlanders aren't even supposed to be made Guy Shane this way, let alone treated the way that they were. So it was important for them to actually protect those people. So Zareen and some of the others from the camp who were protected by some of the brotherless go out and meet Bane and Chiad, who have opted to stay Guy Shane because they are Aiel, so they feel like they actually need to stay with the Shido and complete that year and a day that they need to do. But Bane and Chiad have kind of bended a little bit of the rules of being Guy Shane a little bit to bring to Zareen a pack of some items that belonged to some of the brotherless that helped them out a little bit. The brotherless that were killed in the assault upon Malden. Some of these people that they themselves killed in some cases. They say some words in memoriam for these brotherless and burn the items, except that Zareen actually keeps the blue gem that belonged to Roland, who of course helped her. It was actually a pretty meaningful moment. I thought this scene was actually pretty touching, and it kind of worked, and it gives us some insight to the attitude of Zareen and also some of the other characters who were taking Guy Shane in these moments. So, like, I thought that was really impactful and meaningful. It definitely worked for me. But yeah, that is the Perrin and Zareen plot line for this section of the reading for this week. So we will move on to talk about basically all of the White Tower plot line that occurs in this week's reading. It's going to be several chapters, but we're going to start with chapters 13 and then 24, because these are not in the White Tower, but they are Gawain POVs. So we're going to be continuing on with his stuff. going on. So jumping all the way back to chapter 13, we do have Gawain dueling a warder. You know, he's amongst his younglings. There are a couple of the White Tower Aes Sedai who are kind of associated with the war, with the younglings within this town that they're staying at, which is like Dorlan or whatever it's called, doing whatever it is they're doing. Gawain duels with one of the Aes Sedai's warders, who's named Sleet, if that's how it's pronounced, and wins repeatedly against Sleet to kind of show us that Gawain is a very, very good warrior, one of the best swordsmen to probably exist in the world at this point. He's very talented. Even when outnumbered, he still manages to defeat all of his enemies here. Sleet wishes for Gawain to become a warder alongside him under his Aes Sedai as well, kind of having him deemed him worthy of the role. He explains to Gawain that, like, you know, my warder said that, or my Aes Sedai said that she's willing to take more warders, but I have to deem that person worthy. I've met somebody worthy of being a warder alongside me. I want you to be a warder alongside me. And Gawain basically says that he'll think on it, but in his head he essentially refuses because he remains loyal to Andor, therefore his sister to Elaine, and also to Egwene. And because, you know, of the complications related with that, he only wants to be a warder for Egwene. So he's like, I will think about it, but he's not really going to think about it. He already knows he's not going to. But then Gawain goes ahead and kind of returns to a lodge, you know, wherever some Aes Sedai have been gathering and like having meetings and stuff within Dorlan, whatever's going on here. And he is, you know, he tries to be allowed into the meeting with some of the Aes Sedai here to listen into their plans. He's spurned for it, of course, knowing that while the younglings respect him, that they are truly loyal to the tower, that nothing that he can do against the Aes Sedai or, you know, to force his way into these kinds of meetings is going to work, because the Aes Sedai are going to take control of the younglings if Gawain gets a little out of control. So he knows that he's in a pretty precarious situation here. So he decides to that's going to be important here in just a moment, by the way. Gawain does wait aside, however, decides to just wait aside, and when the Aes Sedai emerge from this meeting, he realizes that one of the Aes Sedai named Catherine, who had left Dorlan weeks ago, and he did not remember getting reports that she had ever returned, and he actually asks some people around, it's just like, when did she come in? And these people were like, I don't remember her coming in, actually, but she has emerged from the top of the building, basically. So he's like, Katryn's among them. That's a little bit weird. How is it that she is among this group? But furthermore, Katryn also reveals to Gawain that Egwene was made Amyrlin of the rebel Aes Sedai, and that she has also been captured by the White Tower and might even potentially be being tortured in the White Tower. And this kind of freaks him out a bit. He's like, how about no, actually? And in light of this news, he decides that his allegiance to Egwene and to Andor is more important to him than is his allegiance to Elida's White Tower and to the younglings and whatnot. The fact that he's in a precarious situation between the younglings who respect him but aren't really loyal to him and the Aes Sedai, he ultimately determines that he's just going to leave. He wants to do what he can to save save Egwene, and to rescue her from capture in the White Tower. He knows he can't take the younglings because they're not loyal to him. You know, he can't take them against the tower, obviously. So he does go to leave alone. He basically he has a guise of inspection of some outer camps and stuff because he's done this before. And he's like, okay, well, I'm going to pretend that I'm going to inspect some other groups outwise, and I'm just going to leave and see how far away I can get without them pursuing me, or hope that I can be away before they can actually find me, type of thing. But it does appear that Sleet, that warder that he was fighting earlier, kind of sees through him. Sleet recognizes, just like, you're leaving and you're not coming back, right? And Gawain's like, well, I can't exactly deny it. You should probably stop me or alert the Aes Sedai or something. And Sleet's like, no, I respect you enough to let you leave. But know that when I'm questioned about this, I am going to tell them that you're not coming back, basically. Or when they realize you're not coming back, I am going to tell them everything. Or, you know, enough, basically, for them to come after him or something. But for now, Sleet actually allows Gawain to go quietly, which is an interesting decision, but honestly, I respect it. But that's going to take us to chapter 24, which is another Gawain POV, and quite a good one at that, because after a few days of riding pretty hard, Only sleeping a couple hours a night, Gowan does make it to the rebel Aes Sedai camp and eventually wins a meeting with Gareth Bryne, his old mentor, by, kind of causing a little scuffle with a few of his soldiers, because that's the quickest way to get to Bryne. Bryne's, pretty displeased with this fact, but Gowan insists that, he must mount a rescue operation for Egwene, and that it was worth, getting a quick meeting with Bryne to actually tell him this, that Egwene is captured. Of course, Gareth knows this already, but Gareth has to break the news to Gowan that Egwene is refusing rescue, that they actually have a means of communicating with her, they have a means of actually trying to get her out, but Egwene will not allow herself to be freed. But Gowan is still pretty convinced that he could convince her to come out, so he asks Bryne to actually think about helping him do this, which, kind of works. But along the way, Gowan also reports seeing in the camp when he arrived an Aes Sedai face amongst the washwomen camp, a little bit strangely, that he thought was weird, and this kind of perks up Bryne's ears. He's like, show me this. And so he leads Bryne over to the washwomen camp to show them. Along the way here, Gareth reports to Gowan again that Morgase was actually pretty bad for Andor. They get kind of talking and rambling about things, that Queen Morgase was probably bad for Andor, that Morgase spurned Gareth and actually basically kicked him out of the country, that the reason why Gareth is amongst this camp is because he can't be in Andor because of Morgase. And this is something that confuses Gowan a little bit and also bothers him. He takes offense to words that spurn his own mother, of course. But Gowan is touchy about the words, but they do eventually come to a mutual understanding that he should probably talk to Elaine about it, and that Elaine will corroborate the story a little bit if/when he returns to Caemlyn, because it is Gareth's opinion that Gowan should just go straight back to Caemlyn and be there beside his brother, even though he wants to go rescue Egwene first and then take them to Caemlyn. So that's the plan that Gowan has, and that's what Gareth tells them. But anyway, they do find the suspected Aes Sedai figure that confuses them a little bit. This Aes Sedai in the camp there is named Shamaran, who we know as Shamaran, who was an Aes Sedai who was lowered from being an Aes Sedai, who was demoted basically down to, was she demoted down to accepted, or was it down to novice? I think it was just down to accepted by Elaida as a show of power amongst the White Tower. This is something that Egwene has kind of continued to proliferate throughout the tower and remind the other sisters that this is something that Egwene did and this should be unacceptable to you guys. This is not something that the Amberlin seat should be doing. That's not power that she should have. But so Shamaran believes that she has been demoted, and having been demoted, she actually escaped Tarvalon and made her way to the Rebel Aes Sedai camp here. And rather than being a spy, I'm pretty sure she's not a spy. She's just decided that that being able to work here was the best thing that she could do out of because she can't go back to the tower now because she's a runaway. That would be dangerous. Gareth obviously believes her in this report, but he does say that he has to bring her to the other Aes Sedai because, he would be admonished for not reporting that an Aes Sedai is amongst his camps, not with the other Aes Sedai. So he does take her in there. And that little bit does become relevant in chapter 26 as well, but we're not going to cover chapter 26 quite yet. That'll be basically at the end of the White Tower section here in just a little bit. Instead, we're going to change gears and we're going to talk about chapters 18, because 18 is still amongst the Rebel Aes Sedai camp with Swan Sanche's POV, and then we'll be going into the actual White Tower itself. So, chapter 18 is Swan Sanche's POV, where it is revealed that there is a panic in the Rebel Aes Sedai camp to some degree, when it is revealed that the White Tower actually knows how to travel now. They learn that because the Rebel Aes Sedai have been collecting taxes from, or maybe they're not taxes, they've been collecting some sort of payment from Borderlanders out of respect for the White Tower as, some kind of supplemental income to the tower. So for operations of the Rebel Aes Sedai, this money is pretty useful, and what they've been doing is they've been traveling directly over there to get the money, because Up to this point, like the Borderlanders, for example, they didn't really care if they were sending the money directly to the White Tower or to the rebel group. It didn't make any difference to them as long as they paid their due. They paid their due. So once the rebel Aes Sedai were able to travel, they were sending people over to collect this money directly on hand, so that the money wasn't going to the White Tower, and more importantly, that it was coming to them. But they learn at one point when going to collect money that some of the Borderlanders have already paid their taxes. So they assume that the White Tower has traveling because they've been able to now collect those taxes. And furthermore, some of the Borderlanders literally watched some of the Aes Sedai use the gateways, apparently, is what it seems to be the case. That's the implication. That's what they believe could be possible. But in either case, they know the White Tower almost certainly has the ability to travel now. Swan does have Gareth Bryan warned to this fact to watch their backs, to kind of be alert, because now that if the White Tower really can travel, that means that they could launch attacks against the Rebel Aes Sedai, real bad ones, unexpected, and that would be a bad thing. So she does have Gareth warned about this fact, like I said, because it could be used to flank them, and because it's a move that none of the other sisters have actually thought to do, because they're more worried about their own pride, the fact that the secret of traveling has leaked, rather than the immediate danger that causes them. That's just how Aes Sedai are, their whole pride problem. But it is basically revealed over the course of the rest of the chapter that it seems like Lelaine was the one who broke the news about traveling being in the tower, that the White Tower knows how to do it. And she specifically broke the news amongst initiates, so like accepted and novices, people who are just going to talk about it, who are going to let the word spread. And she also called for, a sitting of the hall to be made, where she also announces this, but she reportedly actively refused for the sitting of the hall to be made private first while this was being reported for some reason. So it is suggested that she might be looking for some level of chaos that this knowledge would bring, maybe to kind of aid her attempts to be kind of in the running for Amyrlin if/when Egwene doesn't make it back or something. There's some reason why she is making this knowledge known to everybody instead of it being kept private. But what that is, it's kind of hard to tell. I'm still not entirely sure why that is. But that is chapter 18, so we're going to jump back now. That was the Rebel Aes Sedai stuff. We're actually going to go ahead and jump, well, one second. Might I? Well, I could jump to chapter 26, but what I actually need to do is I just need to cover the rest of this stuff before I jump around even more. So we're actually going to go ahead and talk about chapter 16. This moves us inside the tower, and more importantly to Egwene's POV. So we're going to get a couple of really great scenes here. One of my favorite scenes of the last several books is within this content for sure. Absolutely loved chapter 16, to be honest. Really great. And then one of my other favorite chapters is also, we'll talk about in a little bit. So yeah, chapter 16 returns us to Egwene's POV in the White Tower, where she is being questioned by 3 White Aes Sedai, a White Aja Aes Sedai, and one of these being a sitter of the White Aja specifically. She's being questioned about how she would have handled particular political things within the tower, such as having handled Rand and similar things like this, compared to the way that Elaida did. So Egwene makes it known, it's yeah, Elaida did not handle these particular things very well, and I would have handled them this way, and that would have been a lot better. If she had been in Elaida's position, it wouldn't have been fumbled so hard. And she kind of actively criticizes the way that Elaida dealt with this, because very many Aes Sedai within the tower are not fully satisfied with the leadership that Elaida has shown. She's not been very effective. She's not been very good at some things, and she's just straight up biffed and fumbled some of these decisions, such as the way that Rand was handled. Egwene undermines Elaida's position and basically convinces the Whites to do what she's been doing with some of the other Ajas up to this point, to keep in touch with the other Ajas, with other Aes Sedai, to try to repair a little bit of the wounds and the separation between the Ajas, because it's not just that there's the White Tower and the Rebel Aes Sedai, all the Ajas are kind of splitting within the tower as well. That's a bad thing. So she is able to get the Whites to do this, and they send her away, and honestly, they actually show her a decent bit of respect, a surprising amount of respect, in fact, which is pretty cool. But anyway, when Egwene leaves the White Aja quarters, instead of her retinue of a couple Red Aja Aes Sedai to kind of like let her, guide her, or rather be with her wherever else she goes, Egwene meets Catelyn there. So there's Catelyn from the Gowan chapters that we talked about before. Egwene is told by Catelyn that Elaida has assigned her to be dealing with basically constant punishment. She's no longer going to have the opportunity to meet with Aes Sedai because they have no reason to teach her anything. Egwene has proven that she knows the weaves, that she's powerful, that she understands the things that she is being taught as a novice / accepted, a novice effectively. So she's going to just be punished now. She's going to be spending all day, every day, working, between doing different types of tasks. And one of these types of tasks is actually being forced to clean the kitchen for like 5 hours at a time. Egwene does panic a little bit because, not being able to meet with Aes Sedai and be able to talk to them and being able to undermine Elaida with other Aes Sedai, that's something that she feels like she needs to do. So being under constant rotation of chores is not a good thing for her, but within the chapter, she is immediately taken down to the kitchens to go work for a handful of hours. After a few hours working down there, the mistress of the kitchens actually it's the same person who went and helped Swan and Leanne escape back when, they were stilled and deposed and everything back in book 5. Was that in book 5 or book 4? I forget. It was probably in book 5. But Swan, and the same mistress of the kitchens who helped those two, tries to help Egwene escape as well, because she's just like, well, I think that, being punished is one thing, but being made to do constant chores all day, every day is a different thing entirely, and I don't think that's right, so I am willing to help you escape and make it seem like you just happened to disappear, that you just left your post at one point and we don't know where you're at or something like that. But Egwene refuses this assistance because she aims to continue her resistance in the tower, which kind of dumbfounds the mistress of the kitchens, but you can see this even earns a little bit of respect from her, that she's willing to go through this to put up a resistance in the tower. Like, that's kind of cool. But then we get word like Egwene's work in the kitchen is interrupted a little bit because she's told to clean up so that she can serve Elaida at dinner again, actually, because she's being called up to serve Elaida. And Egwene's like, okay, she does this, she gets cleaned up, she goes up there, but instead of Elaida being the only one there, or instead of it being Elaida and Miodani again, it is Elaida with various different sitters from multiple of the Ajas attending. Elaida is basically using this dinner as a form of power play of sorts, displaying her control, her authority over Egwene, to possibly try to undermine Egwene back in person in front of the sitters, and also, kind of admonishing the sitters with her authority to like try to prove to them that like, I'm this big talker, I'm in charge of this place here, you need to respect me type of thing. And like I said, also flaunting her control over Egwene. However, Egwene is able to resist a lot of this because there is a particular question that Elaida asks her. I think it's along the lines of like, why are you lying about whatever X or Y thing? And Egwene says, I'm not lying, I'm actually telling the truth. And she uses this logic. She's able to say like, I haven't actually taken the 3 oaths, but I actually live by the 3 oaths like intentionally, which in some way actually makes it a little bit more respectful of me to do that because I'm choosing to do it instead of not being able to not do it. But furthermore, here's all the problems with your leadership, Elaida, and basically just uses this moment to assert dominance over Elaida, just pointing out all of her failings and her oversteps, things like suggesting a 4th oath upon the rod to swear fealty to the Amerlin seat, which is something that the other Aja sitters did not know about. They're just like, oh, that's questionable, we should not do that. Egwene also talks about how Elaida failed in negotiations with various different things, like with Rand, which gets respect from the Grey Aja, for example. And like, so, she goes over all these little things, gaining respect to some degree from various of the different sitters based off of their color. Like, she uses quotes from a book that only the sitter from the Brown Aja would recognize to get a little bit of respect there. It's just like, oh, Egwene has done a reading. She knows this obscure thing that I know about. That's cool. So she does this and admonishes I know I've used that term a lot, I'm sorry, but she admonishes Elida over her failing in kidnapping Rand, and also questions Elida, like, why would you even try to do that? You know, these prophecies have to be completed in order for the last battle to come, right? And so Elida has to answer like, well, no, they would happen anyway. And it's just like, okay, so why did you try to kidnap Rand to hold him in the White Tower? Were you hoping to like control fate, or what were you expecting to happen through this? And Elida doesn't really have an answer. She just doesn't. So in the end, Egwene is basically able to be like, Elida, you are a tyrant, you are a coward, and you are not fit to be Amyrlin. I'm the Amyrlin. Fuck you, basically. And it was just the funniest thing. And it was not just funny, it was also so entertaining. This chapter was awesome. I loved this entire dinner sequence here. It was so rewarding. I think the White Tower politics has been one of my favorite things about the series for the last several books, if not my favorite thing about the last several books of the series. Just wonderful. And I think Egwene's handling in this chapter was incredible. In fact, it was so well done that Elida crashes out again. She goes crazy. She gets very angry. She breaks Tower law in punishing Egwene by using, what is it, the one power to, like, actually, you know, punish Egwene as somebody who, according to all of them, is not actually Aes Sedai. That's not something that you're supposed to be able to do. And of course, using power as like some form of weapon of sorts and attacking other Aes Sedai is kind of bad anyway. So like, no matter what way you cut it, Egwene's like, or Elida's like, you shouldn't be doing this, woman. But she does this anyway. She freaks out. The other sitters are just like, that's unacceptable, Elida. And she's like, I will do what I want. I'm the Amyrlin seat. I am the absolute authority here. And then she sends Egwene to be sent to a prison cell with the proclamation that Egwene is a dark friend, you know, which itself followed Egwene's implicit semi-accusation of the same, basically. So amongst all of the accusations or all of the things that Egwene gets, you know, after Elida for over the last, you know, over this conversation, basically, one of those things was like, if I didn't know any better, I would call you a dark friend. Because at this point, Egwene's pretty certain that either Elida is, well, there are various people, including some of the sitters here. Some of these sitters are actually people who Egwene talked with before alongside Miadani when Miadani showed her that secret meeting. You know, these sitters of the various Ajas who are working together to try to suss out the Black Aja and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, there's a basic understanding that there was some manner of Black Aja involvement in Elida's being raised to the Amyrlin seat in the first place. And that there may be a chance that either she might be Black Aja. There's also the fact that her Keeper of the Chronicle at one point, Alviarin, was Black Aja. Of course, they don't know that in the tower for sure, but like, there's these big questions. And so Egwene says, like, I think you're Black Aja. If I didn't know any better, I would say you are Black Aja. And so Elida, I would call you a dark friend, basically. And so Elida crashes out over that specific comment. At the end of everything, it's the straw that broke the camel's back. She calls Egwene dark friend and has her sent to the prison. So very satisfying scene, incredible stuff. I thought it was handled brilliantly. But that then takes us to chapter 25, actually. Wait, is it 25? Did I close the wrong chapter over here? I did. I closed chapter 25 instead of 24 earlier. I was not supposed to do that. Sorry, I'm just talking to myself about my notes over here. But that takes us to chapter 25, where the back half of that chapter, it's a very short chapter. It's only a handful of pages, but a couple of those pages at the end are Egwene in the tower, being allowed some occasional visitors down there in her prison cell, which, you know, includes like one of the White Aja sitters or something like that is visiting her in this particular scene. It turns out that Elida's crime that she committed against Egwene here is it's not enough to be deposed over. It's not that serious, but, you know, she has basically convinced some people within the tower that she was able to break that law, that she did break that law because Egwene is a dark friend, and she did it after she learned that Egwene was a dark friend. So did she actually break the law? So whether she actually broke the law or not, whether she has enough people on her side to like support her or not, doesn't really matter, because even if she is punished, like, she has to serve like some manner of penance for a short time, but she's not going to be deposed. She's not cut off from the Amyrlin seat, you know, nothing like this. So that's kind of a concern for sure, but Egwene does continue to push for the Ajas to be working together towards the last battle. She's like, the last battle is coming in, this is important, continue to do what you can to resist. The other POV of chapter 25, however, does see us in Sheriam's shoes back in the rebel Aes Sedai camp. And I feel like it was kind of suggested that there was some sketchy stuff going on with Sheriam, like a couple books ago or something. I forget exactly when she was getting beatings in her tent in the dark from some mysterious figure. I don't know if we actually knew who that was at the time. That she needed to do particular things in service of the Black Aja or the Chosen. I think that was something that happened or was very heavily implied. If nothing else, if it wasn't straight up revealed before now, it is certainly revealed now. Sheriam is absolutely just Black Aja. There's no way she's not Black Aja. If nothing else, she is definitely serving the Black Aja and the Chosen because, what's also crazy about that is that means that Sheriam, having pushed so hard for Egwene being raised to the Amyrlin seat because she was told to do that by a Forsaken, means that the argument against Elida's being a valid Amyrlin because of being raised partially by Black Aja also stands for Egwene, so that's kind of a problem, ironically enough. But anyway, as is, Sheriam's beatings have stopped now because Halima is no longer part of the camp. This is something that relieves her, but in chapter 25, she is actually addressed by another one of the Chosen. She's not sure who, but this Chosen tells her now that Egwene actually needs to be deposed. And she's like, but we literally just raised her and you told me to do that. Why is this? And they're like, yeah, well, we determined that Egwene was not the right option. And she does also force Sheriam to go about to try to steal all of the Tel'aran'rhiod ter'angreal, so all 19, what are they called, Dreamweaver pieces. I have written down all the pieces that allow the sitters of the Rebel Aes Sedai camp to meet with Egwene in the, in Tel'aran'rhiod, despite her being captured in the tower. The Chosen basically says that, hey, we have 20 of these things, but one of them is with Leanne in the tower. It was actually with Egwene, but they believe it was with Leanne. It's so we have 19 of them. And the Chosen says, okay, well, you're going to steal every one of them and you're going to give them to me. And for every one of them that you don't get, you're going to have a finger or a toe cut off. And I'm not entirely sure what it is that the Chosen wants with them. But there's something going on, definitely causing some chaos. But with all that, that's going to lead us into chapter 26, which will be the last chapter that has anything to do with White Tower plotline stuff. That is also the second POV of chapter 26, where we have a Ramonda POV, but also sees us investigating Lelaine. There's also Swan and Sheriam are also involved here. So Sheriam, who we just saw in that previous chapter, Sheriam's also involved here because the four of them are interviewing Shamiran, who of course is that Aes Sedai who was demoted by Elida that Gawain discovered. So these people are interviewing, these Aes Sedai are interviewing Shamiran to learn about how she came to escape Tar Valon and why she is here. And she's able to report, the route that she was able to take to get out of Tar Valon. Swan insists on being able to take the woman with her to get a map of that area because it's not big enough to send an army through or anything like that. But Swan does want to have a map of that so that they have some manner of sneaking into Tar Valon without traveling, presumably, so that can be something useful for them. But in the middle of this little interview, a bubble of evil does cascade some cockroaches into the tent. It is Ramonda's tent, and it is burned afterwards as a result. And Ramonda, some of her stuff is burned. It is gotten rid of here, notably like her journal. I forget what it is about her journal that's suspicious, but there is something from a previous book that occurred with that. She does note that I don't really want to lose my journal in her head, but she tells all the other Aes Sedai, there's nothing in there that I can't replace or that means much of anything to me. So they get rid of all the cockroaches from this bubble of evil that interrupts the interview before Swan goes ahead and takes Shamiran to go show her that little route. That is something that happens. But that is going to allow us to actually return to the Era Daman storyline, because I already talked about the other Avienda POV that we had earlier that actually allows us to just straight up still talk about chapter 26, because the other scene in chapter 26 is a Avienda POV. And that sees Avienda, just like the last couple of chapters, continuing to do these menial tasks that basically identify her as Datsang. So, somebody who's like revolted or reviled by the Aiel. This is not something that you want to be doing. It's a grave insult amongst the Aiel to be made to do things that are inherently meaningless, that don't serve any purpose. So Avienda is continuing to do this thing. Out comes Min to come try to talk to her about Rand, because Min's worried about Rand after what happened in a couple chapters earlier in chapters 22 and 23, but we'll talk about chapters 22 and 23 here in just a little bit. She's worried about Rand for very obvious reasons. We won't talk about that for the moment. We'll get to that in just a little bit. But Avienda basically says that Rand will take care of his own problems just as I take care of my own problems. So, like, this is not something that you need to worry about, Min. But in referencing that stuff, Min does comment and on the task that Avienda is doing. It's like, why are you doing this meaningless thing? Like, why are you dipping your finger into a bucket of water and letting drips of it into his sand? Like, what is, transferring it to another bucket or whatever it is that she's doing? Something about buckets of water and using her finger to drip water elsewhere. This is like Min comments about this task, like, why are you even doing this? It does flare Avienda's temper a little bit, which she does regret in the moment, but in her tempered flare, she's like, I'm done with this. She goes straight to the wise ones and basically tells them, like, I'm over this shit. Stop making me do it. Like, why are you making me do worthless tasks? There's no reason for it. I'm not doing it anymore. And it turns out that in order to actually become a wise one, this is what you have to do. You are made to do these very demeaning tasks until you basically realize, like, I'm not doing this anymore. I will not be controlled by other wise ones. And that's how you become a wise one. And so Avienda does this. She goes to the wise one and says, I'm having no more of it. And so they basically welcome her into her ranks. She's like, okay, you finally made it. You are worthy of being made a wise one. The only task left to do now is to go to Ruidian to complete the process of being made into a wise one. So they tell her to go ahead, travel, make a gateway over to a certain section of the Aiel Waste where she has supplies waiting for her so that she can go complete the Ruidian journey that all of the other wise ones have to do. And then to come back. So Avienda goes ahead and does that. That is chapter 26. But we have been saving what I think is the most epic moment of the book so far. Definitely my favorite section of the book, chapters 22 and 23, where we finally return to Rand's main storyline again with some really, really cool shit. But you remember earlier when we were talking about this plot line at the beginning of the video involving Semirhage being questioned and demeaned earlier. This wasn't at the beginning, it was the other Cadsuane chapter earlier where she breaks Semirhage's pride. This happens in chapter 22, where Semirhage sits in darkness, basically ashamed at herself by how easily Cadsuane was able to humiliate and basically break her spirit here. But in the midst of her wallowing in self-pity, she is visited in the prison by who would have guessed Shaidar Haran, who is of course the Dark One's like right-hand man, the Fade that is the Dark One's right-hand man. And Semirhage is giving one last chance to complete her task of doing something with Rand. I forget what it is exactly. It's obviously not maybe it is killing him, but I don't think it's killing him. It's basically imprisoning him. That's the task that she needs to do. Semirhage is freed from her prison in this moment and also given the domination band by Elsa. So somehow Cadsuane's ward on the box that holds the domination band failed. That is very important to remember. However it is that it failed, the domination band is given to Semirhage, and remember, Elsa was basically revealed as a dark friend a couple of books ago, whenever that was, but I don't think it's even technically revealed in this chapter that it was Elsa. We discover it is in the next chapter because of what happens, or rather in the next scene because of what happens. But in either case, the point is, Semirhage and Elsa are going after Rand now. So that happens. Rand is in his quarters with Min at the moment, and he is basically relenting to Min's insistence that, like, hey, it's not actually healthy to shut off all emotion. Like, this isn't actually the right way to go. She does quote Cadsuane a little bit with this, and that upsets Rand because he doesn't really trust Cadsuane. But he does still relent a little bit because, like, yeah, maybe I am actually going a little bit too hard on some of this stuff. Maybe I should, be willing to open up a little bit to some degree, right? And so he finally is like starting to open up about this, but it turns out there's a serving girl in the quarters that's kind of there a little bit suspiciously. And that serving girl turns into Smearge. Smearge had adopted a disguise, became a serving girl over here, and now she's able to use the domination band, claps that right onto Rand's neck, and uses the power and uses him to do stuff. She's able to control him against his will, and actually being in his POV while this is happening is terrifying because she basically forces Rand to torture Min to some degree, causing her some manner of pain. And then furthermore, beyond that, when she basically makes Rand beg, it's like, I know how to break you. I'm just going to make you hurt the other people you love because you're not going to do anything if I want you to do it. You're going to do something if it's going to hurt one of your loved ones. And so he has her torture Min, or she has him torture Min, and this causes him to beg. It's like, please stop making me do this. Like, please stop. And so she does. But then she says, I never promised that I wouldn't make you do anything, actually. And then she goes ahead and has him choke Min out. Basically, like, come very, very close to killing Min. This scene was so intense, like, just, oh, so well done. Very intense scene of just Rand choking Min out on the ground and not being able to stop. Just straight up not being able to stop. However, Rand is, and in the process, Rand does continually try to reach for the power to try to stop anything, but of course he can't because of the domination band on him. But he does eventually get to a point of such sheer desperation. He sees this weird, vague face of something and is able to reach for a power that isn't the one power. Rand reaches for and touches the true power and uses this to free himself, to free him of his shackles, to break the shackles off of him, and then immediately uses it as well to fire Balefire and destroys Smearge and Elsa directly. Even within this chapter, he was insisting, like, I'm not going to kill Smearge, even though she's right here. I can't kill a Forsaken. I can't kill he has a little bit of internal conflict here, actually. He acknowledges, like, this is a woman. I cannot kill her. But he does have the idea that's just like, but I also need to destroy the Forsaken. So how does this reconcile? Like, this is something that I need to tackle. But because of what Smearge makes Rand do, he decides, like, I'm just in my rage. Boom, gone. Elsa's dead. Smearge is dead. Both of them are gone. And not just dead, they're gone forever. They're out of the pattern. Bip, bam, boom, Balefire, gone. And incredible moment. But as the chapter is titled, Chapter 22, it's literally called The Last That Could Be Done. They have, in a sense, still managed to break Rand because now he has hurt a person that he loves unwittingly, like not on purpose, obviously. But more than that, he has now killed women. He has killed Smearge and he has killed Elsa, and he had used Balefire to do it. This is something that turns him completely cold, where he was iron at one point and then he became steel, and Cadsuane and Min have been trying to convince him that being steel is not right. You need to open up to your emotions. He is steel and he becomes Quendalar in this moment, basically, like something basically unbreakable, in its true form, like should be unbreakable. It's like Rand gets dark in this chapter. It is not comfortable reading at all. The last line that he drew for himself to not kill women has been crossed, and now he has to go from steel to Quendalar. He apologizes to Min for almost killing her, obviously, but man, he gets dark. He shuts off. He goes so cold, and we get to see this in effect in chapter 23. Chapter 23 switching us back to Cadsuane POV because she's getting a report that Smearge's guards, that one of Smearge's guards was killed, that the other two were put in a trance because presumably since they both have warders, that those warders would know if their Aes Sedai were killed. They would go into a rage about it. So Smearge was freed, obviously. But she learns that, like, Smearge has been dealt with to some degree, and they're going to Rand's rooms because they know something happened to Rand's roots here. Cadsuane and some of the other Aes Sedai and some other people make it to Rand's rooms where, like I said, we get to see the effect that this has had on Rand from Cadsuane's POV, and it is, like, legitimately terrifying. He's more cold, he's more reserved, he's more flat, yet even it is, like, genuinely terrifying. It's like, wow, how do you even get a person to this point? Well, it's breaking him beyond literally every boundary, every limit that he holds for himself has been destroyed. That is how you break a man. Rand repeats to them that Semiraj and Elsa, I don't think Elsa's actually named here, but he does announce that that the problem has been taken care of, and not only are they dead, or not only are they gone, they are gone forever. And he implies that this is what happened by showing Narishma, one of the Ashaman, how to weave balefire. And Cadsuane tries to get upset with him, like tries to say, you are not allowed to do that. I told you can't use balefire. Balefire is so bad, it is dangerous. But he is able to basically talk over her by continuing to show Narishma how to make this weave, and says that balefire is dangerous, it is bad, but it is a tool, and like any other tool, it needs to be used in the right time. And he uses the justification for this, given that now he's used balefire to destroy multiple Forsaken at this point, but especially to kill women. Now he says that balefire is the only way to get rid of the Forsaken, because the Forsaken can be revived by the Dark One, so the only way to ensure that these fuckers stay gone, that they stay dead, is to use balefire. So basically, I'm teaching you how to use this thing. Use it wisely as a tool. Do not use it otherwise, but he does teach Narishma how to do it, and does actually get back at Cadsuane, does get mad at Cadsuane for trying to get mad at him. It's just like, don't try to control me. I know what I'm doing. And Rand is like very in touch with Lews Therin at the same time as well. He speaks about himself in ways that are like, what makes you think that I can be controlled by you people who are thousands of years my junior? Because he's basically Lews Therin, several thousand years old, with some of this knowledge. And like, this is also pretty terrifying, seeing the two of them come a little bit closer together in this moment. To explain what happened a little bit, Rand also has Cadsuane inspect the dominating band, because it is in the bed, like the shattered pieces of it are still in the bed, and Cadsuane's like, that's impossible, this can't be freed, like I have a ward on the box. But then Rand's like, yeah, well, we explored your rooms because we thought you would be there, but we explored your rooms, here's the box, it is open, whatever wards you set on it were ineffective, and we're able to get God around. She's in disbelief about this fact. Cadsuane's obviously not, like, she's not comfortable with this. She doesn't know how it happened, but more importantly, she does not apologize. She doesn't actually do anything to apologize to Rand for this happening, for letting it happen, for however it happened. It doesn't matter to her. It happened, and that's not good, obviously, but she does not apologize to Rand. And to close the chapter, Rand banishes her from his sight. He says, get out of here. If I ever see your face again, I will kill you. He straight up threatens her to her face. And she's like, you can't threaten that. You're somebody who's promised never to kill women. And he's like, yeah, well, I just did. That is a line that I've crossed now. And I know I can and will cross it whenever I need to now. Like, this is something that has been broken inside of me. I have no reservations. Get out of here or you are dead. That is basically how the chapter closes. Cadsuane leaves, distraught, not sure how she's going to be able to save Rand from himself now at this point, because that's basically the task that she set for himself. That's what she's been trying to do this whole time, is to save Rand from himself, so that he can actually go to the last battle, in one piece, basically. But yeah, Rand threatens her life, threatens to kill her, and yeah, what a moment. These two chapters 22 through 23, one of my favorite moments in the series, hands down, not even a question. Just, wow, what quality. This book is peak. You know what I was saying last week and even this week about this book really reminding me about what I love about The Wheel of Time? It's not just that there are high moments and that they're good. It's that everything about this book so far has been great, and there have been incredible moments mixed in there. There was that, the chapters between Egwene and Elaida that were really good, both the original dinner that we talked about last week, I think, but also the dinner with the other sitters, and her basically putting Elaida in her place, like, you are a coward and a tyrant and you should not be Amyrlin, and like that whole chapter, great, was the best chapter in the book up to that point. Chapters 22 through 23 dealing with Rand and Semiraj and all of that, just So good, so freaking good. But yeah, that is I think this diary is even longer than last week somehow. I'm sorry for that. I didn't intend for that to happen. Actually, no, it's not going to be longer because like 20 minutes of that was me figuring out what order I was going to talk about chapters. Hopefully that worked out for you guys. But by the way, actually, let me know how that worked. I know I'm jumping between a lot of chapters, but I'm trying to make sure that like the storyline of this is somewhat coherent in my mind so that I can keep track of it a little bit better rather than going from one chapter to the next and bouncing back and forth between stuff, because then I feel like, you know, it's a little bit harder to like actually, you know, condense some of the information and to talk a little bit less about stuff when I'm doing it that way. So these diaries are long enough as is. They certainly don't need to be any longer as is. This book has been incredible. I've been really loving it and I cannot wait to continue. At the time that I'm recording this, it is February 4th, so it is actually the night before the first episode's supposed to go out. I somehow need to spend the 2 hours tonight before I go to bed editing the first episode so that it can actually come out in the morning. None of this really matters in this video because, you know, that was 2 weeks ago by this point, or over a week ago by the time you're actually watching this, or it doesn't matter. The point is, I'm halfway through the book already. And I was thinking that I would like read a quarter of the book and then go and read something else on the side in between stuff. I do think I'm going to spend the next few days reading a different book that I have for a read along over, you know, the rest of the weekend basically. But then there's a pretty good chance that I read the next half of the book, the rest of the book pretty quickly. I'm not going to have the book finished by the time this diary comes out, but I do think that by the time next week's diary, the third diary covering the third quarter of it, there's a good chance I'll probably just be done with the book, because if the back half is anywhere near as good as the front half, and the front, I've heard reports that this book entirely is pretty good, there's a very good chance that I'm just straight up done with the book by next week's diary. But speaking of next week's diary, we should be covering chapters 27 through 37 next week, so that'll be 11 chapters that we cover in next week's diary, and then I'll be covering the rest of the book in the last diary. So you know, if you've been following along reading to some certain extent, that is how much reading to get done in the next week before the next diary comes out. But otherwise, I hope to see you guys there. I've been really loving this book, and I cannot wait to experience more of it. But that is the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC. I'm sorry for the lengthy videos, but I hope to see you guys in the next video.